This whiskey may not have an age statement, but it might just be my favorite Japanese malt whiskey. Let's talk about Nikka Yoichi. Hey guys, welcome back to Whiskey on the West Coast. I'm Matt. Today we're going to be talking about a Japanese malt whiskey, and that malt whiskey is Nikka Yoichi Single Malt Japanese Whiskey. Now, this Japanese whiskey is near and dear to my heart, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But there's a reason why it's the first one that I'm including on the channel here for a review. One of the reasons I just really enjoy the profile. But let's touch a bit on the distillery, on the Yoichi distillery, and just a little bit about the history, and then we'll get right into the review. So the Yoichi distillery is located on the island of Hokkaido in the north of Japan, and it was set up by Masataka Takasuru in 1934. Now, Masataka, he actually studied making whiskey in Scotland. He actually attended the University of Glasgow in 1918. He apprenticed at Longmorn in 1919 and at Hazelburn and Campbelltown in 1920. So he learned how to make whiskey from the Scots. And so he modeled his whiskey off of scotch, which big thumbs up for me. You know, I like my malt whiskey. He's doing it just the same way. Now, when he returned to Japan, he set up this distillery in 1934, and he picked Hokkaido because this northern island in Japan, the second largest island in Japan, it has a climate much like that of Scotland. It's a lot colder. It has a temperate climate as far as I understand, and it has a lot of seasonal change. I know anecdotally there's snow there up until March sometimes. So again, a climate very similar to Scotland because he wanted to reproduce that Scotch profile. Now, this bottle is a non-age statement. It's NAS expression. And that's because during the big boom for Japanese whiskey, when it got very popular after winning so many awards, they were running low on stocks. Almost every true Japanese distillery was. And so they had to remove the 10-year-old age statement off of this. So this is now kind of that base core expression from the Yoichi distillery. Brought to us by Nikka. Now, the 10-year-old has returned in a limited run of like 9,000 bottles. There's too little of it to actually replace this non-age statement version. So this is going to be sticking around. Now, one of my favorite things about the Yoichi distillery is that it's the only, as far as I understand, the only coal-fired stills operational left in the world. And I really appreciate that profile because, number one, I really like direct fired stills like Glenfarclas, like Springbank. I really enjoy those profiles. I find they're a lot meatier. There's a lot more heft to the spirit. But also, the last coal-fired stills in Scotland, I believe, were Glendronach's, and they were changed over in 2005. And I really love pre-2005 Glendronach. I got a 2003 single cask I love, and that older whiskey, it's just different than what's coming out now. Again, it has more body to it, more heft, maybe a touch more of a sulfuric note, which I don't like the rotten egg sulfuric notes, but I like the matchstick sort of sulfuric notes. So I really love that about how they make this whiskey in the old school way they sort of make it. Now, as a side note, I believe pre-2001 Ardmore also used coal-fired stills. So check that out if you find some older Ardmore expressions. Back to this whiskey in particular to set up the review. This whiskey, again, non-age statement. It is single malt. It is chill filtered, it is colored, and it is bottled at 45% alcohol. I am uncertain as to the cask makeup, but I am going to suggest it's most likely some sort of ex-bourbon cask. Maybe fact check me on that because I haven't actually looked into what the cask makeup is on the Yoichi. One more thing to mention here would be the rules around Japanese whiskey recently changed, and they've actually tightened them up, made them a lot stricter, which is a good thing for consumers and for whiskey enthusiasts because it's going to weed out a lot of the whiskeys that were kind of masquerading as Japanese whiskeys when really they were just Canadian and Scotch whiskeys that were blended together with maybe a little bit of Japanese. What I will say is this is actually a Japanese whiskey. Again, as you can tell, it was distilled on the island of Hokkaido. It is a Japanese whiskey, so that's great. So let's dig into this review, and I'll give you some nosing and some tasting notes on this, and we'll get to a score. Okay, on the nose. Oh man, it's so fruity. Fruity with like there's a peat smoke and like an industrial note that catches my attention right away. But off the top, like banana, papaya, maybe some melon. I'm not gonna go like pineapple necessarily, but tropical type fruits. There's some citrus in there too. It almost reminds me of like Five Alive, like fruit juice. Not quite that juicy, but those same sorts of fruits all thrown together. But it's held up with this backbone, with this structure of the peat. It smells moderately peated. It's not super lightly peated where you're just getting a wisp. It is quite noticeable. It's pronounced. It's not heavily peated though. So moderate peating. Yeah. And again, a sort of an industrial note, which I'm guessing is coming from those coal-fired, direct-fired stills, which, oh man, love that. Some pear, some salt and brine too, which is nice. Yeah, it's just, again, fruit, smoke, industrial, brine. Very enjoyable nose. It just invites me to take a sip. So let's check out the palate. Malt sweetness, smoke, that oily industrial note comes in right away. Gives way to the fruits. Again, banana, very present. Papaya, and I'd say pear. And then I need another sip to continue that thought, because right now I'm going through the finish, which again gave way to that industrial note, that bit of greasy oiliness, and into the smoke, and the smoke really dominates and takes over. There was a bit of pepper on the front of the palate, but more in a spicing way, not in an alcoholic bite way. There's no bite on this. It's a very pleasant sipper. Okay. I just really love this whiskey. Oh, it's delicious. Again, it just starts with that fruit, that malt, smoke, oil, fruit, a bit of spicing, and some coastal, like some brine, oak spice. Yeah, it's just really enjoyable. This is a perfect whiskey to like have as like a session. Like, I think this is a whiskey you can pour for anybody and just have multiple drams of. Super enjoyable. On the finish, again, it goes into that peat smoke. Peat smoke is billowing. It really kind of fills your mouth and gives way to that industrial note. It's very rich. There's a touch of resin, almost like a pine nut sort of thing, or like a slight hoppy note. Still really nice, and maybe a little bit floral. There's a little bit of floral note on the finish too. I really enjoy this whiskey. I have a personal connection with it because the first time I drank this whiskey, I was on a fishing trip into the South Caribou of British Columbia, staying at a cabin on a lake. I love to kayak and fish. And I cracked this whiskey on a moody day, the fog across the lake, bit of rain drizzling, inside by a roaring fire. It was the perfect place to drink this whiskey. And I went through quite a bit of the bottle up there. I haven't touched it much since because I've been a little precious with it because I got it at a great deal. it's usually about $100 in my market, and I got it for about $55. It's a stellar whiskey. And for me, I've had some other whiskeys. I've had Yamazaki once or twice. I've had Suntory Toki, which is really just for highballs. I've had Hibiki Harmony. To me, this is better than the Hibiki Harmony. This is better than the Toki. I don't know if it's better than Yamazaki, but I don't consider Yamazaki entry level for Japanese whiskey. And for me, if I'm going to be buying actual Japanese whiskey at entry level, Nikka from the barrel does not count because it is not Japanese whiskey through and through. It has scotch and they claim over 100 different whiskeys in it. If I'm going to buy an entry level Japanese whiskey to enjoy, it's probably going to be this Yoichi. I really love this stuff. And that's why I'm giving this a score of 87 out of 100. I love this profile. I'm not going to say it's reminiscent of Campbelltown or something like that, but it has an industrial funk to it. It has the peat. It has a ton of fruit. Super enjoyable. If you haven't taken a shot or a chance on a Japanese whiskey, I highly recommend Nikka Yoichi as your first Japanese whiskey. It's phenomenal, and it will break any preconceptions that you have about Japanese whiskey being light, floral, citrus, some cracked pepper, these sorts of things. It's much more complex than that, even in something that's just entry level. Give it a shot. I think you'll enjoy it. Thank you so much for sticking to the end of the video. I really love the comments on the videos, the discourse, the dialogue that everyone's having, the conversation. It's really encouraging to see. So if you can go ahead and just like, share, if you haven't already subscribed, go ahead and subscribe. And comment down below. What are your thoughts on Nikka Yoichi? And more specifically, what is your favorite or what is your go-to entry-level Japanese whiskey? Doesn't have to be malt, could be a grain whiskey. Let me know in the comments down below. As always, thanks for joining me, and I hope you come back for more in the future. Sláinte.